Hey guys, it's Daddy D-Rock here. So I'm here today to talk about a specific topic, and that is the Switch OLED and the idea of a 4K Switch dock. So right off the bat, I just want to say that this is complete speculation on my part. This is meant to be more of a thought experiment. So let's get right into it. Last week we were introduced to the Switch OLED model, and it wasn't exactly what everyone was expecting. All of the rumors and information coming out of Bloomberg and other outlets really cited this as being a measured upgrade to the original Switch. A true 4K system with DLSS upscaling, a new SoC, upgraded performance, and instead what we got was essentially an upgraded handheld, which had been reported on. Some of the details actually were incredibly specific. We heard about the Surface style flap, we heard about the 720p OLED screen, we even heard about Ethernet and LAN being built into the dock. So clearly this information was coming from a credible source, at least in my opinion. It seemed like they were getting mostly everything right, with the exception of this 4K thing. So that kind of got me thinking, how did they get all these other details right, but get this major one so wrong? It sort of provoked this idea in my head that maybe Nintendo is planning to release a separate 4K dock. A very Nintendo thing to do. Instead of giving us exactly what we want all in one package, they separate it out. Essentially, this theoretical 4K dock could have its own NVIDIA chip built in that handles the 4K DLSS upscaling. It might even offload some of the graphics processing as well, which would kind of allow the Switch to run games at a higher frame rate, smoother performance, maybe even overclock the system while it's in this dock. So if we're operating under the idea that they're going to introduce this 4K dock and introduce it as a separate product, then maybe it's compatible with the current Switch model as well. You don't need the OLED model. You can use the launch model, you can use the revision, and you can use the OLED, and it will upscale the game to 4K. Well, that's kind of the best of both worlds from a consumer standpoint. You don't necessarily have to upgrade your Switch if you don't want to. If you only play docked, you don't really have a reason to buy an upgraded handheld. You would have to pay, $450 for this bundle with the upgraded gamepad just to play at a higher resolution on your TV. But if you have a separate dock, a separate product, at that $130, $150 price mark, you don't have to do that. Instead of spending $450, $400, you're now spending about $150. That's a better value proposition for those who play docked. And if you do want the upgraded handheld, well, now you have the option of kind of doing both. You have more flexibility as a consumer. For the record, I really don't think this idea would be out of the realm of possibility. It seems to line up with a firmware data mine from back in January, in which a device is mentioned by the codename of Aula. Supposedly, Aula would offer 4K functionality via a new chip, existing separate from the gamepad itself. I'm inclined to believe that this was the source of the Switch Pro idea, when in reality, a Pro dock seemed to be the more likely alternative all along. I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that Nintendo is planning to phase out the current Switch model with this new OLED model. I think that's maybe part of why the Switch OLED model doesn't really have its own delineated name or identity. It's just the Nintendo Switch, in parentheses, OLED model. It's not called the Nintendo Switch OLED. It's not even called the Nintendo Switch OLED model. It's called the Nintendo Switch, in parentheses, OLED model. That kind of makes me think that they're trying to position it as a replacement. They aren't giving it this branded, unique identity because they don't want to create confusion when they eventually phase out the current Switch with this new one. Again, that's just speculation on my part, but if you look at what they did with the 3DS versus the new 3DS, it would kind of make sense. They took the original 3DS model, and when they introduced the new 3DS, they slowly phased out that original 3DS model. I mean, for a while they coexisted on the market, but after several months, you couldn't find the original 3DS on the shelves anymore. It was only the new 3DS, and I feel like maybe they're planning to do the same thing here, which again, is maybe part of why its new name is not so flashy or unique. It's also worth noting that the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X introduced 4K functionality to the console market almost 5 years ago now. So Nintendo's own foray into 4K gaming is long overdue at this point. Nintendo stated last year that the Switch was about halfway through its current life cycle, so that would probably give us about another 4 years on the market. And for me, it's hard to imagine the Switch existing in its current state for that long. It's already starting to show its age, especially when compared to the PS5 and the Series X. Again, even the 5-year-old PS4 Pro and Xbox One X systems offer more in the way of power and resolution. So I would be surprised if the system didn't receive a mid-generation refresh in the foreseeable future. It's about time for the Switch to catch up. Ponder this for a moment. If adding 4K functionality to the gamepad might price it too high, this would seem like an ideal solution, because it's been stated before that Nintendo is pretty intent on not selling the Switch at a loss. They're making a profit on this system, and if they push the cost of the system to $450, $400, not only does it undercut that value proposition that the Switch currently has at its lower price point, but maybe they can't make as much money on it either. And at that point, it's not really a replacement to the standard Switch anymore. It becomes more of a marked upgrade. So if this is indeed the case, it's easy to see why Nintendo would want to stick to that $350 price target. After all, it sets the Nintendo Switch apart in that it's more affordable, especially compared to the Series S or the Series X or the PS5. So if you introduce a new Switch model at $450, even $400, you could be compromising that idea. And from a marketing perspective, they might have viewed that as unwise. And so then you're probably saying, if it's more expensive, then why would they even bother to replace the current model at all? It might actually be cheaper right now for Nintendo to source OLED screens as opposed to the traditional LCD screens that they have right now. So if that's the case, then they're going to be able to make slightly more profit off of these new systems while also upgrading it for the consumer, so it's kind of a win-win. Why wouldn't Nintendo just bundle this 4K dock together with this OLED model? Wouldn't they actually make more money that way? They would kind of strong-arm the consumer into having to buy this $450 system if they want to upgrade. They don't have the option of buying, this dock separately. Wouldn't that make them more money? Well, I don't know. Not necessarily. Let me put it like this. If we subscribe to this idea that bundling all the 4K functionality together between the gamepad and the dock would price it out of being competitive, then separating the two makes sense from a marketing perspective, and it benefits the consumer as well, because when you separate them, what it allows Nintendo to do is maintain that lower price target of the OLED gamepad at $350, and then you're also giving the consumer more flexibility with how they can upgrade their current Switch or not upgrade their current Switch. If they want 4K functionality, all they have to do is buy this dock. They don't have to buy a completely new system. I'm not so sure that a $400, $450 Switch Pro model would sell that well. Another factor that we kind of have to consider right now is the chip shortage. I mean, of course, if they do come out with a 4K dock, it's going to need to integrate that chip into the dock itself, but maybe that's not something they're going to be able to bring to production until 6-7 months, a year from now. I mean, that has got to be a consideration for Nintendo. If Nintendo is planning to do something like this, it would kind of explain why they haven't announced it yet. So if these two separate products do indeed exist, I'm kind of thinking that reporters from Bloomberg and all these other outlets were actually conflating these two separate units as being one single thing, the Switch Pro, when in fact they were separate all along. If they had this idea in their head that it had 4K functionality, then maybe there's still some merit to that. Maybe there's a product that just hasn't been announced yet. As far as why they want to wait, I mean, think about it. If this dock is indeed compatible with all Switch models, and again, this is theoretical, why would you position it right next to the Switch OLED? Obviously, handheld players are more interested in the Switch OLED. So for those who are disappointed by the Switch OLED model, I would say be patient. I personally believe that a 4K enabled Switch device is on the horizon. I think Nintendo has to see the necessity of a more powerful 4K enabled system, especially when the Switch sometimes struggles to run first-party games at a consistent frame rate. Pair this with the fact that 4K TVs are rapidly becoming the new norm for average consumers and gamers alike. Just to reiterate, these are just things to think about. It's just, what if? What if Nintendo is planning to do something like this? I'm just sort of putting the idea out there because I think it would make a lot of sense from Nintendo's perspective. And honestly, I think it would be good for fans of Nintendo as well. And I think it would be good for current Switch owners. You're not locked in a box with how you upgrade, or if you upgrade. So what do you guys think about all of this? Do you think a 4K device is coming for the Switch, or do you think the OLED revision is all that we're gonna get? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Well guys, I think that's pretty much it for this one. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to my channel. Also, let me know if there are any other topics you'd like me to cover in the near future. I'm always looking for new subjects to talk about and subjects to make videos on. Doesn't have to be video game related, but if there is a video game topic or any other topic, go ahead and let me know and maybe we can talk about it. This is Daddy D-Rock. Peace out, y'all.